Hello and welcome to today's HubSpot Academy Master Class on demystifying conversion rate optimization. We'll be getting started in just 1 minute. Hello again, my name is Joel Traugott and I teach all things analytics and optimization here for the HubSpot Academy. HubSpot Academy is a worldwide leader in inbound marketing and sales education, offering online training for the digital age. Today we're going to discuss conversion rate optimization, a relatively new field in digital marketing that many marketers are having trouble with. Conversion rate optimization is a process you can use to research, discover, and validate new ways to create great experiences for your users and drive leads and revenue for your business. Today, I'm joined by the powerful Michael Aagaard, Senior Conversion Rate Optimizer at Unbounce, who will be busting the most common myths in conversion rate optimization and telling us some stories. Michael's been obsessed with conversion optimization since 2008, when he started as a freelance consultant working in varied industries and companies to optimize their digital marketing activities. Since joining Unbounce in 2015, Michael's been traveling the world speaking at conferences and teaching audiences what he has learned. Michael's a true and great leader in the CRO industry, and we are pleased to bring him here to our audience here at HubSpot Academy. So without any further ado, Michael, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'll just grab the screen here. Alrighty, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I am super happy to be here today with you, Joel. This is going to be a fun session. As you mentioned, we're going to be demystifying some CRO myths here. There are quite a lot of them. As you mentioned, it is a young industry, and if we're talking about the evolution of CRO, whoops, sorry about that. Hi again. And we're back. All right. So yeah, it's still a very young industry, and I know this is a little bit corny to use this slide here, but you know, we're on an evolution here, and I think we're all still trying to learn kind of what's up and down here. Nobody has the definitive answer for what CRO is, and for me, it's been a long journey. And it's been one that I've been involved with this since 2008, and it's been a big part of my life, and I've evolved as a human being together with CROs. So in 2008, you'll see here, this is me, by the way. There's different stages here also of looks. But in 2008, I certainly wasn't a toddler, but I was absolutely a toddler in CRO terms in that perspective. Called myself homo oblivious at this state here, fresh out of well, not much experience and so on, and you know, I've been to school and all those things, and I thought I knew everything, and I didn't understand why the people at the first agency I worked at, why they didn't just like listen to me, because I knew all this stuff, right? Then we got to 2010. By that time, I kind of like figured out all the stuff about A/B testing, and I thought that was the solution to everything. Test is randomness, just test everything, any random idea. I thought I was being scientific just because I was testing stuff, which is pretty ridiculous. I can see that now. Then I had a bunch of humbling experiences, and I found out that split testing wasn't the key to everything, and I wasn't scientific just because I was testing random things. And also I found out that there was, you know, a lot of the background stuff I didn't understand, stats and so on. So I kind of reinvented myself, and I realized that I certainly didn't know everything, and I had to really, you know, pull myself together and start learning this stuff. And then 2017, call myself at, I think, a Cro-Magnon stage here. Little pun there. But the point being that I'm not a Homo sapien in CRO terms yet. I'm not sure I ever will be. And I love that, because that's one of the things I think is so fantastic about conversion rate optimization is I do believe I'll keep learning forever. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So what I'm trying to do with a webinar like this today is I'm really trying to catapult the audience, you guys, over all this huge learning curve I had, because I did it the hard way, trial and error, and I made so many stupid mistakes. And I'm trying to help people, completely avoid all those stupid mistakes. And a way of doing that is by busting a couple of myths. So the first one here is that conversion rate optimization is all about optimizing conversion rates. So that might sound a little bit weird, a weird point, because it sounds like the point is to optimize conversion rates. Well, it is, but it's not the only thing. I think a good way of putting it here is that you have to be a little bit careful that you don't stare yourself blind on that conversion rate. My friend Peblaya from Conversion Excel, I think, puts it very well. A couple of times I've heard him say, if you want higher conversion rates, just make everything free on your website. The conversion rates will go up, but unfortunately you won't be making any money. So the point being that the conversion rate is not the only thing out there. So really you need to ask questions like, you need metrics where you can answer the question, is my business doing better than it was yesterday? And your conversion rate doesn't always tell you that. And let's dig into that a little bit more, because I'd say you kind of have to understand what a conversion rate is. So for example, people will say something like, our conversion rate is 2.37 exactly every day, and it never changes. Well, I would say, interesting, but based on what? You can base a conversion rate on many different things, and a conversion rate can measure many different things. So if we're saying conversion rate for your main goal, that could be selling something on an e-commerce site, for example, I'd say, what is that conversion rate based on? There's a big difference between sessions and users. What are you using? Do you know? For example, if you're using Google Analytics for everything, you're probably basing it on sessions, because that's a session-based tool. If you're using Kissmetrics, you're probably basing it on users, and so on and so on. But sessions basically is visits, and users are visitors, two very different things. So obviously your conversion rate is going to be higher if you're using users, and that is also a more accurate metric, I'd say. But what about goals? Your conversion rate, which goal are you looking at here? There's a big difference between a click-through and, for example, purchasing something that costs $2,000. What vertical are you looking at? All kinds of different channels will probably have different conversion rates, referral sources, and then it continues. Definitely days of the week and days of the month have different conversion rates. I've never ever seen an analytics account where there is a uniform conversion rate on weekends and weekdays, and I've seen a lot of Google Analytics accounts, seasonality, and so on and so on and so on. Device has a massive impact. So sometimes people have a tendency just to talk about a conversion rate as being one thing, but it's many, many different things.
Michael,
another example. Yeah.
This sort of ties into one of the questions from our audience. We hear this a lot, like, what number should I be focused on to get started? If it's not my click-through rate, like, where do I even begin?
Yeah. So that's a big topic, I'd say, but something that a metric that's meaningful to you. So you can have different KPIs, right? You can have a main KPI that might be, for a SaaS company, it'd probably be trial starts, and for e-commerce, it'd be a sale, and so on. Then you might have, some little bit softer conversion goals you can measure, and that might be for e-commerce adding to basket. For example, here at Unbounce, one of the things I do look at is how many people visit important pages, how many of them actually start signing up and then drop out, and so on. So there's a lot of different metrics you can use there. The main thing is just an exercise, I'd say, of actually going through it and saying, what means something. For us, as a SaaS company, I'd say lifetime value is the most important metric. So I use that a lot in split testing. I don't use it as the main KPI right now, but that's something where I want to update an algorithm to be able to do, but it takes a little bit. But right now, I'm always calculating our lifetime value, estimated lifetime value for the variance and split tests, because there's a big difference between which plan you sign up for. Like $4.99 is worth more than a $79 plan logically, and also if someone signs up for an annual account, that's different than monthly. So this has a massive impact. So for me, it doesn't really make sense to put on the blinders and only look at a conversion rate or count this variation got 99 signups and this one got 80, and then treat them the same. It doesn't really make sense. So for us, lifetime value is really important. And I've seen different experiments we've run where actually just raw numbers counting signups, the treatment is underperforming. But as soon as we do a sanity check and see how much money it's making, it's ahead. So obviously in that case, it would, in my opinion, you should go with the money and you shouldn't just go with raw numbers. And if you're a consultant, another thing is you need to you learn the language that the client uses. So it took me a while to figure out that if you just go, oh, a 53% lift, they don't know what that means, obviously. And then I started talking about money, but I had clients where they weren't counting. They weren't used to talking about money. They're used to talking about leads. So you have to find the right language, also, and the right metrics.
So it's more of a holistic approach.
Yes, definitely. So there's different metrics at different stages, but always keep your eye on the health indicators. Are we moving in the right direction? So another one could be, for example, our landing page converts at 1.20%. So I'd say, again, based on what? Like, what are you basing that conversion rate on? So here's an example from a landing page. We see a conversion rate of 1.20 here, but that's an average. And you'll see here that there's a bunch of different channels going in there. So for example, in this one, this is not a horrible example. It's just a simple example to show it to you. So we have Google and Bing. And obviously we have a lot more traffic from Google, and we have a small sample size from Bing, so we might have to be a little bit careful with these. But there is an indicator here, and you'll see that the conversion rate is actually over 3% for Bing, and it's 1.17 for Google. And then we have some drip traffic here. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It could have been bigger numbers, but you'll see that the average conversion rate is based on this, right? So you'll see when you start unfolding it, that average could be, covering up the truth. And furthermore, I'd also say, well, maybe we should treat these two channels differently then, and so on. So again, a point being that, just be aware of what a conversion rate is, and also be aware that they change all the time. It's not like you're going to have a static conversion rate of 1.20 forever. And it does not mean that if you run an experiment and you get a 10% lift, that's going to be there forever either. And here's an example. You'll see, this is an example from the website. We're looking at the conversion rates. You'll see they fluctuate like crazy. There are some patterns you'll see here that are recognizable, but the main point here being that they fluctuate wildly from day to day. And that also kind of, goes into your whole data background or whatever, statistics and so on is if you're running a test, well, does it make sense then to run a test Monday to Friday and then run another one from Saturday to Sunday and then compare? I would say no, because those are two wildly different days. So that goes back to the point of, for example, testing for full weeks, so that you know that you're getting, you're actually running your experiments over periods that are representative of the real world, really. So I jumped ahead a little bit before, but the point here being, we talked about before with metrics, is my business doing better than it was yesterday? That's the most important thing to look at. And like I said before, if you're only looking at that conversion rate, for example, well, you could be throwing away pennies, or throwing away dollars for pennies, which is obviously not a good tactic. I also jumped a little bit ahead here before, that all conversions are not created equal, and that's very, very important. And here's the example from Unbounce. You'll see it ranges quite a lot from $79 a month to $399 annual, monthly, and so on. So there's quite a few things to consider here. And I'd say the worst thing when CRO gets really, really stupid, that's when you actually start optimizing towards the wrong goal, right? Well, you think you're optimizing and you think you're being scientific and you think you're heading in the right direction, but you're actually doing the opposite. You're killing your business. And that's one of the reasons why understanding statistics and so on is really important, especially if you want to conduct split tests. Which brings us to the next point, a myth that I hear a lot. People often have an impression that conversion rate optimization and A/B testing are basically the same thing. It's basically, a discipline of running as many tests as possible. I used to think that, and it's kind of a sexy thought. It's awesome. Whenever you're in doubt, you split tested, woohoo, and then you just go, you do that all the time, and then everything just magically gets better. And that's, in my opinion, a very limited understanding, and it's wrong. People will sometimes introduce me as an A/B tester, and I actually I get offended because I'm like, no, I'm not just an A/B tester. That's a small, a tiny part of what I do. I'm into conversion optimization. I left out the rate there. So what I kind of like to compare CRO in 2017 to where SEO was at in 2008. Again, it's a young industry. We're all trying to understand this. And for example, SEO today, it seems, in my experience, from working with a lot of different companies and speaking to marketers all the time, that people have an understanding that SEO is complicated, and it entails a lot of different aspects. There's on-site, off-site stuff, technical, local, international, and so on and so on and so on. All this goes into SEO. And if someone were to rock up and say, well, SEO is just link building, that's all, just build some links, people would be like, really? You don't know what you're talking about, do you? But this is, what happens after an industry gets well established and a lot of companies start getting into it and they become smarter. They can actually become critical, of it. And we're headed there, CRO, but we're not quite there yet. So the way I look at real conversion optimization, I'd say, is like this. Basically, it's a very complicated field. It involves a hell of a lot of different disciplines, and you kind of have to be multidisciplinarian to be able to do this right. I like to compare it to golf, the golf of online marketing. In sports, you'll have these incredible athletes who just like excelled in whatever, basketball and so on, and then they retire, they start playing golf, and they get hooked. They never stop because it's so difficult, and you're also competing against yourself. That's the way I see CRO, and that's why it's beautiful. But you have to understand statistics. It's the backbone of everything. Every time you look at any form of data, there's stats involved. If you don't understand stats, it's really hard for you to be critical of the data you're looking at. And I would say it's basically impossible to do proper split testing if you don't understand stats. The scientific method is extremely important. It's ridiculously important that you understand some web analytics. It's really important you have a bit of business sense so you can actually make wise decisions. And copywriting is insanely important as well. Research, qualitative, quantitative. I'm probably going to say that all these are insanely important, but yeah, I do mean that. UX and design.
This leads me into a question we get from agency partners a fair amount.
Mm-hmm.
They always want to know who on my team should be doing CRO. Is it my PPC person? Is it my designer? Is it me? That seems like a sticking point for some.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think so. I think one of the big mistakes that agencies make is they underestimate CRO, and they go like, "Hey, who can do this?" Well, John, our SEO guy, he's smart. Yeah, he's a new CRO expert. Hey, go out and do some website reviews. We'll only charge $20,000 for them. Or it's something like, Joe, who comes in like twice a week, our student helper, whatever it's called, our intern. Yeah, well, he's smart. Let's make him our CRO. So I think that happens a lot, or you try to find someone in your team and then make that person magically become like the CRO guy. In some cases you can do that, but in many cases I think it's kind of this weird assumption that if you know this other field, then obviously you're gonna be good at this too. Sometimes analytics people are really good at this because they kind of have analytical mind frames. In some cases, people who are very focused on analytics just have a problem translating that into something that you can create a human experience based on. So I'd say look for some qualities instead. And if you're to hire a new person, I'd say you look for someone who has a logical, analytical mindset, someone who approaches problems in such a way that they strategically, try to look for a solution here, someone who's curious and passionate, someone who, always asks that extra question, say, yeah, okay, but could you dig one layer deeper? Okay, so that's your conversion rate. Can you show me your conversion rate on devices? Aha, and so on. The Strength Finder, Gallup Strength Finder, I think is an amazing exercise. I'd say people who have strategic as a number one strength are I would say great fits for the conversion rate optimization role, because a person with a strategic power in Gallup terms is someone who is good at jumping into a situation, getting an overview, analyzing it, and then based on what's in front of them, choose the right way forward. Basically, cut through the clutter, and that's what I basically spend most of my time doing as a CRO. So I would probably say get a hold of someone who shows some of these qualities, and then preferably someone who has experience with analytics. and obviously if they also have experience with copywriting and so on, that'd be really, really good. But it is difficult to find. But if you have someone on your team who shows some of these qualities, that's great. I think some people kind of, because it's new and it's nobody understands it really, and it shows so much potential and it's mysterious, zero. I think some of them trying to think that it's this quick thing you can learn and then you can like get ahead of everyone. And I'd say if that's your approach, then you're headed straight towards failure.
It's like keyword stuffing was to SEO in
totally,
2005. Yeah,
totally.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And then, so that's why when the beauty of it, I think, is that it's so complicated. And then when people reduce it to just one thing, well, then it doesn't make sense anymore. And so A/B testing gets so much attention. I hosted Conversion CXL Live 2017, Conversion Excel's yearly annual conference. I was the host for it this year, so I basically got to see all the speakers because I'm a speaker myself, and normally I'm so preoccupied with my own talk I don't get to see it. So I got to see every single speaker, and the beautiful thing was that it is transition. So people weren't really talking, the speakers weren't talking so much about A/B testing anymore. The ones who were, they're just talking about how to do it right. They're talking about how important it is, that you base your A/B testing on proper research and so on. And so that means that the industry in a whole, as a whole, has kind of moved in the right direction and taken an important step forward. So that's where we headed. But A/B testing, exactly. So that was the myth we're on now, is that zero and A/B testing are the same thing. And this is my point, it's not mandatory. People think that split testing, you have to do it, but absolutely not. It's just one tool out of many we have at our disposal, and we use it when it's helpful. We don't use it when it's not helpful. And when it's not helpful, that is especially when you don't have enough traffic, you don't have samples that are large enough to actually get proper data. Because the point of split testing is not, to find confirmation, is to find information. That's the important thing. That's why you have to also be disciplined and understand stats when you're doing A/B testing. So a lot of people, like, you'll hear advice like everybody should be split testing, or it's safe to say that if you aren't A/B testing or split testing, then you're not getting the full potential out of your online marketing. That's just not true. That's insane advice. So I'd say I'll show you an example of why. Here's a very common scenario, right? You have a current conversion rate, a baseline conversion rate of 2%. You want to detect a desired relative lift of 10%. Your target significance level is 95%. For that, and we're talking frequent testing here, for that you'd need a total sample of 156,800 users, to be able to detect that lift. You get 50 users a day. How long is that test going to take? Drum roll.
About a week.
Yeah, 8.5 years. So, it's safe to say that this puts a different perspective on that split test. And then I would say this is just not fast enough. If it's going to take you 8.5 years to get a conclusion on this, that's just crazy. You do not have enough traffic to do proper split testing. You could try to get a bigger lift, you could try to get more traffic, whatever, but in the current situation, this is the truth. So you can make a business decision then to say, I don't care, I'm going to stop it after a week, after 7 days, but I'm actually missing over 3,000 days then. That's fine, but then you just have to understand that there's no stats backing what you're saying here. Right? And there's no science behind it. So, for example, doing an exercise like this and understanding the required sample size just changes everything for you. And in a case like this, you don't run the split test. It doesn't make sense. So I'd say a very, very important part of all this is actually, being disciplined enough to do this stuff up front. So this is what often happens, right? Week one, the test is charging ahead. You have a small sample. That means that, any little action, any conversion is going to have a massive impact. So you look at it the first way, if on e-commerce, for example, there's a novelty effect. People come back every week and they're like, oh, wow, now the button is purple. I'll try to click it. So, during the first week, you might see a big, big lift, and you start popping the champagne. If you're a consultant, you call the client, you're like, dude, we got a 600% lift, man. We're going to revitalize. And then, week two, not quite as impressive. Week three, week four, it's basically flattened out. And this was the entire test duration. So this is why it's important to know how long to run the test before you have a sample that's really representative. And in this case, well, it ended up being basically no difference. It tanked a little bit. So this would obviously not have been a super smart decision if you had popped the champagne and stopped it in week 1, because it would have been the opposite of what the truth is. That's where it gets really dangerous, because then you start learning from this. You're saying, wow, and actually you're learning the opposite of the truth, and then maybe you start sharing it and you write a blog post, and then it becomes part of the collective kind of best practice and so on, and then it gets really, really dangerous. You can try. We built a split test calculator here at Unbounce with duration and so on. It's the one I showed you an example before. It's a really good exercise. Try and use it. Try to play around with the baseline conversion rate, desired lift, and daily average daily visitors, and then you'll get a good feel for it. So basically, as a rule of thumb, the higher the baseline conversion rate, the higher the desired lift, the more traffic you get, the more likely you'll be able to pull off split tests, and vice versa.
So quick point of clarification for the listeners. When we're talking about a desired lift of 10, that's a 10% lift from 2, correct?
Yeah, and we're talking relative here, a relative lift. And that's a question I get, is like, how do I know? Well, it's saying, well, obviously it's hard to predict. But one thing is that if you know your daily amount of traffic, then you can plug that in, and then you can see like how big of a lift would I need to be able to pull this off in a reasonable time frame. A reasonable time frame for me is a month. I end up running at Unbounce. It doesn't make sense for us to run tests for less than 2 weeks. We can with sample size, but that's the duration I need for it, to be somewhat representative. I'd rather run them for a month. But that means that maybe you can get away with, running a test with your traffic within a month, but then you might need a 50% lift and not a 10. 50% is high. It's a high lift. That means you can't just fart around with some button copy or something. You need to do something radical. And another thing that's horrible about bogus case studies of people starting their test before they're cooked is that a lot of them show these insane lifts that are just not there. They're imaginary lifts. And the problem is that a lot of people share them, and then the expectations are set that for a split test to be a success, you have to have like 100% lift or something. That very rarely happens as a true lift, simply because people aren't running them long enough. So this exercise will help you kind of understand that stuff a little bit better. Another one is one I see often that I just talked about right now is people will show you kind of something like this, 400% increase in conversion, and people go, oh my God, it must be true because there's a green arrow and it's pointing up. I'd say, well, really, this to me is pure evil, and so many people do it. I'm shocked that people still do this, where I'm like, hey man, as an audience member here, you are giving me zero data to be able to be critical of what you're showing me, and that makes me feel uncomfortable. I'd say increase in conversion. What conversion are you talking about? Again, is it click-through rate? What is this? What sample is this based on? How long did you run the test? It's like, what I can't, if people just show me this, I have to stop listening, because I'm like, I don't know, you're not showing me enough here. Because let me show you what could be behind these numbers here. So this is an example I used. Here's donors and donations. This is from an example from a charity I was using this example with. So for example, you have control and treatment. You might have, well, let's say you have 2,000 in each sample, your control and your treatment, right? And then you have 1 in 5 conversions, donations here. So that is a 400% lift right there, but it's a lift from a conversion rate of 0.05 to 0.25. That's not a lot more. So, if we change this and added just a few more conversions on the control, for example, well, then we'd quickly be down to a lift of 30% or something, and very, very quickly it won't be there. So this is not a 400% lift. This is a snapshot in time where at that moment there was a 400% difference. It's not the same as saying that you can recreate this. It's not the same as saying this is conclusive, right? It's basically like this. It's basically like taking this picture and saying, this is proof that man can fly. Oh, really? Well, you can only see his feet. Maybe he's jumping, and it seems like this is something, maybe he's hanging on to something. This is not proof at all. This is a snapshot in time. It's the same thing. And this, exactly this here is one of the reasons why I think there's so much misinformation going on, because like in the scientific, in academia, if you're running a test, you're doing an experiment, there's peer review. People go through it and they try to, they call BS on it if it isn't true and so on. And it's not the way it is in marketing. We just publish whatever the hell we want to, and we claim whatever the hell we want to. That's a big problem. So I have respect for the fact that you can't disclose everything, but when I show case studies, I always show the sample size, and I want to know how many conversions in there, because you could have a sample size of 50,000 and then 4 conversions, then it's still silly. I want to see that. I want to know how long. I always show how long I ran the test for, what was the duration, and then I show the significance at least, because with those 3, numbers on there, those 3 stats, people can actually, make I'm not showing them everything, but it's a large step towards being critical of the case I'm showing. I had a sample of whatever 2,000 conversions here. Could be new trial starts for us. We ran the test for 4 weeks, and we had a significance level of 99%. That's very different than I had 10 conversions. I ran it for 2 days, and I had a significance level of 70. So with just that, you're just helping people being critical of what you're doing, and that means that we can help each other, because then we'll know the truth about the case studies and so on people are presenting. Just a little quick thing about stats again is I love this quote from Deborah J. Ramsey. Real accuracy depends on the quality of data as well as on the sample size when we're talking stats. It doesn't say that it depends on getting a 95% significance level. These things have to be there before. If the quality of your data is poor, well, then, so is your insight going to be. And also, again, sample. You need a sample that's large enough to be representative, meaning we're running a split test to understand how would this perform in the wild, and that we're trying to mitigate risk by trying to understand that sample size is very, very important. And just to drive it home here, 95% significance alone is not enough to guarantee valid test results. Sample size and duration are critical. So this is also just to get back to the fact that split testing is more complicated than a lot of tools, vendors, blog posts make it out to be. It can be very, very helpful. It can also be the opposite. It can be absolutely detrimental to your success. And again, it is not mandatory. So it's just a tool you have. And if you don't have enough traffic, then it's simply better to compare periods and not use split testing. We published a cool blog post, Aaron Orendorf, a guest post on the Unbounce blog recently. I'm in there, and Pep Lai and a couple, handful of other CRO people. And this is a pretty interesting article, I think, that Aaron kind of created here, because he asked us all to kind of try to, explain what makes a true conversion optimizer. And I think some of we're basically, everybody in the post is getting to the same points, and I found it quite interesting, and I think it would be helpful. You can check it out.
So this goes back to what you're talking about finding kind of skeptics, people who are into process and analytics and digging and exploring.
Yes, this post is there's a lot of different angles there on what to look for, and also how to call out people who are, well, basically phony, I'd say. One of my pieces of advice there is, for example, if I interview someone, I want them to display, I'm trying to figure out, do they have a process, right? Because I'd say process is king. It's so important. So I would probe into that, and I would also ask them a question like, if you run a split test, kind of what are your stopping rules? How would you, how do you figure out when it's cooked? And if they go 95% significance, then I'll say, oh, thank you. That would be all for today. Or if they don't mention the word research, for example, in the whole interview, then I'll also know that that's a bad sign, because it sounds like then they'll be basing important decisions on their gut feeling, which is, in my experience, a very bad tactic. And that brings us to the third myth. It is best to follow best practice. That was the way I worded it, but it kind of revolves around best practice, really. And what is best practice? A lot of best practice becomes this tactical stuff, right? You'll see articles like this one, for example, 50 split testing ideas you can run today. And that sounds great, but again, it's just like, so really? You give me 50 generic things I can test. I talked about test duration before. At Unbounce, even at Unbounce, we have a lot of traffic. I run a lot of my split tests for a month. Well, if I'm going to spend a month on each test to get proper results, does it sound good that I'm going to just find a blog post and then go through 50 ideas, 50 random things that worked on e-commerce, for example? This happens a lot. It's the same thing with button color. It's the same thing, you know, page length and images and all this stuff. And then new trends appear, you know, you're like, conversational forums or whatever, and then everybody ghost buttons and people jump on that. And it's a lot of this best practice just comes from people talking about it, you know, or for example, people running split tests on bad, you know, using bad stats and drawing the wrong conclusions. So my point here is that I'd say a lot of best practice is actually just worst practice when it comes to tactical stuff like this.
So Michael, would you agree with this statement then? Really, the best practice you need is a process that is involved with research and actual, like, getting into the weeds.
Yes, exactly. And I'm going to get into that right now. Actually, so that's perfect. So to set this up, there's this one quote by Einstein I love. I use it a lot. If I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. And to me, this is beautiful and it's so important in CRO. This is what it's all about. Again, going back to the whole testing thing. For example, if you're going to be running, you know, you test for 1 month, then you have 12 shots a year. So I'd say you better make goddamn sure that, you know, every single attempt counts. So again, it's all about finding the problem. So you know what, it's very hard to solve a problem you don't understand, and that's basically what you're doing if you're just applying the 50 best practice tests, for example, because you're just randomly going through stuff and you're blindly, you know, hacking away and trying to hit something along the way. So let me give you an example of understanding a problem before you try to solve it. This is an example from before I joined Unbounce. I was a consultant for many years, and this is a project I had with my former business partner, Craig Sullivan. And so this is there was a SaaS company we were working with, and we're doing a website review for them. So this is basically their sign-up funnel process. So you have it's very typical. You have a pricing page, you have a sign-up page, you have a confirmation, then you have to check your email, you have to click the link, and then you're all the way through. So, you know, just off the top of my head, I was like, oh, the sign-up page is horrible and we can do so much on the pricing page. Those two, you know, that's where we should start. And that's my gut feeling. And again, I mean, in some aspects, I probably have honed my gut feeling a bit from having done a lot of this, but on the other side, often it's useless. So we did our analytics review, and we were trying to we did our data-driven review of the website, and we figured out that the biggest drop-off was actually between the email and then people confirming it, which seems insane. We're like, wow, I mean, after people have committed and basically signed up, we're losing them in the confirmation email. That's weird. So we went through it and we figured out they're using the same email template for everything, basically. So even if if the first email you get from them is the same template, so that one has a big green login button that takes a lot of attention, right? And then there's another link that goes to the homepage, and then there's a text link, which is actually the verification link, right? So what happened was a ton of people click the big green button, login, because they're going to log in for the first time, and then they get an error message, and the error message says that you have to check your email and click the link, and then people do that, and then they loop around and they get angry and they take off and they think of competitors. So obviously, that's a big problem. What's the solution? Well, I would probably just recommend having only one link in there and making it very clear that that's the one you have to click to verify your account. And then I'd say, test this? No, hell no. This is a no-brainer. You just fix it. There's no reason to do this. You're not going to test it for a month. This is obvious. This is one of those goes into the bucket. Just fix it. It's the same thing as if you lock the door to your physical store and you were wondering why you didn't get any customers, and then you unlock the door for a week and said, oh, strangely enough, I get customers. Then you lock it again. No. Fix this, start working on something more important. So what I'm also saying here is that we could spend a long time testing the pricing page and actually doing the wrong thing, because if we hadn't understood where the problem was, plus all our testing on the pricing page would have been fundamentally, screwed, because we didn't know that there was a hole in the funnel later on. So all of the testing there would have been massively influenced by the fact that they were dropping out later, and we wouldn't be able to control that. So it would have been just a horrible experience for everybody. So this is one of the reasons why research is so important, and understanding these problems before you try to solve them. This is what real CRO is about. I would say this is one of the most important things. So this takes us to process. So this is basically the process I use. this is the most simple, the most I can boil it down. You'll often see those little diagrams where there's like, 4 points. There's basically just like research, test, do more, validation, rinse and repeat. That's very, very oversimplified. I'll get into the process a little bit here, but one of my points here is this used to be my entire process. Just run as many experiments as possible at a time, random, I've changed now. Now this is basically my process. This is where I spend most of my time conducting research, forming and validating hypotheses, and then, analyzing the data from my experiments. That also means that I do implement everything from, for example, split testing into analytics, so I can analyze it afterwards. And another point I have here is when I say conduct experiment, that does not necessarily mean a split test, right? Because as I said before, it's not mandatory, but you're always experimenting, you're always finding ways of observing, having a hypothesis, testing it out through observation, and then, refining your hypothesis and getting conclusions. So experimentation is always important, but that experimentation method doesn't have to be split testing. And then my point is that everything starts and ends with your users, your customers, everything. It's digital, it's ones and zeros, it's spreadsheets and so on, but it's a real person who whatever you're doing has to have impact on them. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. So understanding your customers, what goes on in their heads, their various motivations, all that stuff is just the number one most important thing. And it's not madmen anymore. I don't think that marketers have to be psychics. I think this is a very interesting way of doing it, working with data. And getting back to the point you had before, yes, I'd say that the only real best practice is to have a solid process that helps you get through this. Something that you can replicate, something that you can use again and again to achieve good results. So with mine here, research, it always starts with research, that's the bulk. Then I have a whole step about forming and validating hypotheses based on my research, which hypotheses are valid or reasonable, and so on. Based on that, we're going to start creating a treatment. That means wireframing and so on, writing copy, creating that thing. Then we're going to conduct experiments that could be A/B testing, could be over comparing over time. There are many different ways of doing it. Based on that, you're going to get some results back. You're going to analyze them. You're going to learn a lot, and then from there, you're probably going to do a follow-up experiment. You're going to refine what you did, and that's the way. The process kind of keeps going over and over. This is how you recreate it. All right, that was it for my slides here, and I do believe we're ready for some questions.
Absolutely, let's get some questions in here. So the first question that comes up is, do you have a particular process or methodology? I guess you sort of shared it, but is there like a branded process out there somewhere that you really like or recommend as a good starting place?
Well, I would say check out Conversion Excel and Conversion Excel Institute. Pep Laya has some very, very solid courses there. He is, in my opinion, probably the most legit guy in the business. And Pep and I were both we had the same mentor, Craig Sullivan. I mentioned him before, and so our methodologies are very similar. And it's all about insights. It's a very research-driven approach. So his master classes are amazing.
Okay, here's another one. Michael, can you share a funny experiment or a test, something that'll make us chuckle?
Yes, I can. I have many. So I once conducted an experiment. I set it up for an e-commerce client using VWO, and I didn't quite understand, what I was doing. So I was tweaking a dynamic element with the basket and stuff, which meant that it was porcelain. It was porcelain and so, but it basically meant that for a whole weekend, all you could put in the basket was a plate, even though you're trying to put whatever cups are in there. So yeah, a lot of angry clients and way too many plates. Another good one is I ran an experiment where I tested button copy and I changed it to "don't click this button." It's a completely insane experiment. At least I was doing it on one of my own things and not, doing that for a client. And as it always happens, the only thing good about the experiment was I ran it long enough to see that it basically, didn't really have much of a difference. And I was testing it on one of my own kind of ebook landing pages and stuff. And people know who I am, so I think they just thought it was funny, and it seemed they'd already made up their minds. So in the first week, it was doing better, small sample and stuff. And it would have been funny if I'd stopped it there and like started writing blog posts about the fact that you should write, don't click this button. And then, 4 weeks later, the thing I think it ended up tanking and doing slightly worse. Anyway, so that's a good example, I think, of just a completely stupid split test where there's no hypothesis or any reasonable, reason or motivation to do it other than, I don't know, insanity.
That's fair. Thanks for sharing that. So another one, man, it's hard to keep up. We got so many questions coming in here. What stat software do you use or recommend sort of in your day-to-day?
I don't use a ton of, I do a lot of my stuff manually, to be honest. I mean, a lot of it is pretty basic, it's pretty basic stuff. But I mean, for example, well, there are many different duration calculators. The one we built for Unbounce, I think, is pretty cool because it combines a couple of different things. So it kind of gives you, idea of test duration, but it also helps you kind of understand the relationship between, the different numbers that go in there. So that is something I use all the time because, one of the first questions I have if I'm approaching problem is like, so what kind of tools do we have here at our disposal? So one of the first things I'll do is I'll try to figure out what's our testing bandwidth, right? And then pretty quickly you can figure out like, is that an option to A/B test or not? And if it isn't, then I'll just like say, no, I can't, no reason to even consider that. There's abtestguide.com out there is a cool tool. There's some Bayesian and frequency test calculators in there as far as, confidence, significant power, all that, p-value and so on. abtestguide.com, you can search for that. Some of my friends in the Netherlands, Online Dialogue, created that one. So I actually say that those two tools together are pretty awesome. There's a very, very simple, it's very ugly website, but it's called Maths is Fun. And they have a bunch of cool percentage calculators and stuff that I use just, to make life easier as a little secondary brain. But most of like for frequency stuff, it's pretty basic stats. But that's probably my number one recommendation when people ask what's your best split testing advice. I'd say go back and learn statistics.
Okay, here we got another one coming in here. So what's an alternative to A/B testing? So if you're not going to test, sometimes you just go with your gut. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say comparing periods is the best thing then. And so the whole point of A/B testing is you're trying to eliminate some bias because you're running it at the same time on the same kind of quality of traffic, you would say. So that eliminates some seasonality. It represents a whole new, a whole new can of worms as far as what can go wrong with split testing. Let's not talk about that. So basically, you'd be doing the same thing. You'd just be comparing periods. So comparing periods, there's going to be noise. So you'll want to be careful, and you want to have samples. You want to have or the durations you're looking at have to be representative, and they have to be pretty much equal. So it doesn't make sense that you're looking at the last 6 months of data, and then you change the page for 2 days, and then based on those 2 days, you go, oh, it's doing better or worse. It has to be representative, and then also you're trying to eliminate noise. So you might want to look at. You make sure that you're looking at the right channel, the right device, the right campaign, and so on. You're trying to eliminate as much noise as possible, and then you're trying to compare periods over time. So that also means you should be aware of different things outside that could have an impact. Like you're testing Santa Claus on your buttons, and wow, it did. You're doing it in December. And you're like, well, maybe there's something there, right? If you compare it to July and so on. So some of those reasonable things. But yeah, establish the baseline. Establish, make sure you understand what's going, what that baseline is made up of, and then compare, for example, whole weeks. Let's say something like change it and implement it for a month. And compare what happens on the next thing. One way you would be saying, for example, if you change something for a month, say compare that to, first of all, last month. Let's compare it to the same month last year. Let's compare it to a stellar month and a bad month. That's some of the things I've been doing at Unbounce. That kind of gives you a good idea of where it's how it's performing now, or how it's when you're comparing those periods, that helps you understand it a little bit better.
That makes sense. So rather than doing it sort of at the same time, just take 3 months and then try the next 3 months and be aware there will be some noise in there.
Yeah, something like that. And then obviously, if you're not split testing, then I'd say, well, research is the most important thing, but it's even more important when you're doing stuff like this. So, go back to user testing, go back to, interviewing your customers, and, just doing a lot of, especially qualitative research. And I would even do that with split testing. I'm saying, don't think of split testing as a tool for conducting research. Think of it as a way to qualify your hypotheses. You spent a long time doing a lot of awesome research. You put all that together to the best possible treatment, and now you're using split testing as the final sanity check to say, does this work? I think that's the right way to think of it. Split testing is not research.
That makes sense. So we got another one here. What are some basic statistics, terminology, or concepts any CRO needs to know?
Well, you need to understand p-value. You need to understand, it depends on, so frequent testing is very different than Bayesian. So let's not talk about Bayesian right now. Let's just stick to frequent test because that's also the most common. We're talking frequent test hypothesis testing. Well, you'll have to understand what the null hypothesis is. You have to understand what is a power level, what does significance actually mean, what is p-value, sample size, confidence bounds, error margin, some of those. You basically have to understand what all those things mean. And if you do, then you'll have a pretty good idea of stats and the stats that go into A/B testing.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit on the research you do? So how do you see where it breaks down? Is this primarily through Google Analytics?
Yeah, so there's different ways. The way I like to think about it is, as soon as there's a problem at hand, you're trying to understand the problem to be able to solve it, and then quickly I'll try to, or as soon as possible, I'll try to get some user-based insights, some user data. So Google is Google Analytics or anywhere analytics setup is pretty handy for that. I like to think of GA, Google Analytics, as my little conversion buddy. He's the geek I have at my hand. So I'll be like, for example, you're looking at a landing page and go, what the hell should we do here? And go, I'll ask Google and say, hey, Google, where do people go after this page? So then you can, for example, look at your landing page report, you look at your entrance paths, and you can see the second page that tells you where do people go after your landing page, which is very informative, because then you're like, well, everybody's going to the home page. Wow, I wonder why they're doing that. Don't they trust us? Is that just normal behavior? Everybody's going to the customer support page. What does that mean? Everybody's going to pricing. Oh, then we should talk about pricing. It seems important. It tells you a little bit about intent. Or I try to break it down on devices. I say, okay, so what's most important here for Unbounce, for example? We don't see very much action on mobile, because inherent in the product, it's basically Photoshop with built-in CMS and A/B testing for creating landing pages. You're not going to do that on mobile. So understanding that is very important, and so on and so on and so on. So basically, the way I think of it, again, is we're trying to understand the problem. So you can use quantitative approach like analytics to understand kind of like what and where, what's going on where, and then you need the why. That's when you turn to your qualitative methods. So then, that would be, for example, running a feedback poll, or doing a session recording. That people are dropping off in your sign-up funnel. You don't understand why. You start, you set up your session recordings, and they start recording them, and you'll see, oh, okay, so they have a problem. Actually, the formatting of the country code or whatever is limited to one specific way of putting it. People don't know that, so getting errors. Okay, let's fix that. Or you start running feedback polls, and you say, hey, on your landing, why are you abandoning, why are you bouncing on the, sorry, not bouncing, I'm not talking about a one-page visit. Why are you exiting the website on the pricing page, for example? And then you could ask them, is it because you're just doing research? Is it too expensive for you? Do you need to talk to your team or something like that? So you're constantly trying to dig deeper and understand better.
Okay,
so that's the approach I do.
So I think we've got time for one more question. I think this is a good one. So people who are leaving this webinar today, if they can go back to their desk, close down the webinar, and just do one thing to get them on the path to be a better CRO, what should they do? I know, not best practices.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Well, oh man, there's so many. I'd say actually sit down and maybe try to use the calculator I showed. So if you have an assumption that you're going to run a split test here, just try to use a calculator real quick and see what the baseline is. Plug in the amount of variance, and plug in how many visitors, how many users you get per day. Put in all that stuff, and then just play around with it and just see actually what will it take for us to run a split test here. Maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised, and maybe you'll actually be like, wow, okay, 8 years. So I think that's a kind of a very tangible thing to do. But more than that, I would say, going back to the Einstein quote, just remember that, right? Try to be a little bit more, this is very broad advice, but I think A/B testing is a shiny object, and if you can stay a little bit away from that, that is very constructive. If you can start focusing on trying to understand the problems before. So when you approach something before, you go, we should test that. Then you go, should we actually?
Okay, I like it. I think that's about all the questions we have today from the audience. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Michael for joining us, as well as the audience for being here live today. One thing for everyone who's watching this today to keep an eye out for, we're going to be launching a conversion rate optimization certification towards the second half of the year, so people can pick up a easy to use, ready to go process to actually do some of this stuff. Michael, do you have any last words, any advice, anything for our audience before we sign off?
Don't underestimate CRO. It's a very complicated area, and also don't stare yourself blind on that conversion rate aspect. Make sure that you're doing stuff and looking at metrics that indicate health of your business, and don't think that CRO is only split testing, because then it's going to be a horrible thing for you. And I'm looking forward to you guys' course. I think it's going to be awesome, and it was a pleasure being here today. Thank you very much for having me.
Michael, thank you so much, and we hope to have you back very soon.
I'd love to.
This one's for the audience. If you've enjoyed this masterclass, you're in luck. On Tuesday at the same time, my colleague Courtney Sembler will invite a best-selling author, Whitney Johnson, to a masterclass to discuss leveling up your career and driving corporate innovation through personal disruption. This can be a great one. She's a best-selling author. She's got a lot to say, so don't miss it. And I think that's it for us today. Michael, thank you again. Everybody on the line, thank you so much. I hope everyone learned something new.